Okay, class, this is part 2 of the Chapter 1 lecture, and we just finished up principle number 3, that argument is always grounded. And by the way, I should point out now that if any of the concepts I'm explaining or any that you read about in the book aren't clear, you can always post a question on the discussion board on Blackboard, and if you do that, I will answer it, and everybody in the class will be able to see the answer, and everyone can benefit from your question and the way it gets answered. Alright, so let's move on to principle number 4. Principle number 4, arguing not only involves making claims but also supporting and defending them. Okay, now this is somewhat related to my earlier point about argument is not just making or expressing opinions. If people are just expressing opinions all the time but not backing them up in any significant way, you could see that we really wouldn't have argumentation going on. One of the reasons I had you watch that amusing Monty Python clip, which is on the ArguNet website under videos, if you hadn't had a chance to look at it yet, is that the frustration that the arguer who has paid to have an argument is having is over the fact that he's not really having anybody support or defend their claims. They're just making contrary statements to the statements that he's making. And so in that sense, they're just expressing an opinion or making a claim, but not doing anything in addition, and therefore there's a lot of frustration with the notion of claim making and argumentation. So argumentation has an additional dimension that's very, very important, and that is the claims are not only made, the opinions are not only expressed, but there's also backing that's offered for those claims. As a matter of fact, a very significant percentage of what we study in argumentation classes is the nature of that supporting material. What kind of evidence are you using? Where does the evidence come from? Is it sound? Is the methodology sound? Can it be compared with or contrasted with, or does it clash with other evidence? Also, you have to defend your own claims and arguments from attacks of others, so that's another part of it as well. It's not that you're advancing claims and putting out forms of support. You're also defending the claims that you've made against a similar sort of attack or assault by the other side. So if, for example, you studied a statistic in making an argument, and the other side in the argument challenges the statistic or offers a superior piece of data, that's within the nature of argument, that you have to defend yourself or expand or enlarge or extend the claims that you're making if you're going to prevail. So this is an essential aspect of argumentation, is that you make a claim, but you don't stop at just making the claim. Making an argument isn't just expressing your opinion or making an argumentative claim. It's also supporting it using all the available tools to support arguments. We have a whole chapter on that, by the way, coming up later. And also you have to defend your arguments against the attacks of others, because people will try to bring down or undermine your own arguments. And by the way, later you're going to have a chance to look at some videos which are really great examples of people attacking and defending other people and supporting other people's claims. Okay? And by the way, the word, a nice word that's used to describe this whole process of making claims and supporting them and defending them, is the term advocacy. So by learning how to argue and how to support and defend claims, you're learning how to become an advocate. And you've probably heard, for example, lawyers described as advocates in trials or in cases, and this is the art that we teach in argumentation, the art of advocacy, to be able to stand for a position or a viewpoint, or in the case of an attorney, for a client and their interests. That's a very important concept in argumentation. Principle number 5. Argument is prepared and presented in anticipation of judgment. And you probably recognize Judge Judy. If you've never seen Judge Judy's show, you really should watch it sometime. It's terrifically entertaining. I don't watch a lot of television, but I do definitely recommend that show. A lot of arguments are made, And the judge, in this case, Judge Judy, she reveals a lot about the nature of argumentation because she gives you insight into the process that she uses to judge arguments or make judgments. Okay, so anyway, what is judgment? Judgment is the decision, the rendering of an opinion by an expert or a jury or a group or an audience, somebody who's listening to the argument, the nature of the argument, who's got the better claims, who's backing up their claims, who's winning, who's prevailing. Argument has a unique attribute in that argument is always designed to be judged. Think about it. Nothing that you ever write or said did you want somebody to ignore or not pass judgment on. Let's say, for example, you didn't like a grade you got in a class. You want to make the argument that you deserved a better grade. If you try first making the argument to the instructor might say something like, well, I don't change grades, or I don't accept your argument. But if you take it to the next level and appeal the grade, or try to get an independent or objective group of people to examine the issue of your grading, then the way they judge is very important, and what you marshal as evidence, what you present as an argument, why your claim that you deserve a different grade should be respected, is all in anticipation of how it'll be judged. You always write or prepare arguments with a judge in mind. You never go into a situation where you're making an argument where you don't have at least a conception that somebody's going to sit there and ultimately evaluate whether you're right or wrong. Now, one of the things we don't like to bring into the picture when using this kind of a standard is the possibility that the judge is corrupt or unfair, or won't vote for you, or is irrational, or won't vote for the right reasons, or makes a very frivolous decision, or a decision that's based on things that are not germane to the case. But I think most of us believe that we will never engage in any kind of argument or make any case if we don't think it's going to be judged, and we write with that judge in mind. A lot of traditional books about argument, which look at the formal validity of arguments, like logic texts, or look at purely audience-centered approaches of whether or not you're going to persuade an immediate audience of something, don't really give fair reading or fair attention to this idea that in your mind you have a conception that somebody is going to judge your argument, and that you write and prepare and develop your arguments with the judge in mind. So anticipation of judgment is you always think of an argument at the same time that you think, oh, somebody's going to listen to this and render a decision about whether it makes sense or whether it follows. It's a very important concept in argument. Very important. Okay, by the way, one other example of what I'm talking about. If you were applying to graduate school and you had to write an essay, you would have to assume that somebody was going to read the essay. You would never write it with the notion that nobody's going to read this, or a person isn't going to judge this. And you'll have in your mind a person who would read it and understand it like any reasonable or rational or intelligent person would. If you didn't have that conception in your mind, then you wouldn't be able to write it. And so not knowing who's reading it is not a reason to not present the argument. That's why I say it's different from just adapting to the immediate audience, because in an immediate audience you know who your audience is, right? So, for example, if you're giving a speech in a class with other college students, you're not going to go in and give a speech about how college is a complete waste of time, because everybody in the room is going to college and they're spending money and spending time and spending effort in order to get a degree. It would be kind of a not well adapted argument. However, there might be somebody out there in the world, a reasonable person, kind of an archetype in your mind of that person, who would accept such an argument. And there actually are people who do make the argument that college education is not necessarily worthwhile or the most worthwhile thing. So don't think that adapting a claim to a particular audience is the same thing as preparing an argument in anticipation of judgment. But once you know something about the particular audience, you can make additional strategic adaptations. Very important principle of argumentation. And as a matter of fact, if you take principle 4, that argument is making claims and supporting and defending them, and that it's prepared and presented in anticipation of judgment, you pretty much have our definition of argument. Argument is making claims, supporting and defending them in anticipation of judgment. I didn't actually say what the definition of argument was because those two principles conjoined is what is the definition of argument, at least the way I teach it. Principle number 6. Argument differs from persuasion. One of the things that's interesting in the field of communication is that we do a lot of mushy things with language. We use words interchangeably that aren't necessarily interchangeable. For example, if you remember back to taking your basics public speaking class, you gave a persuasive speech. Part of developing that speech effectively was to create arguments in support of the claim you were making. You might have been supporting a proposition of value or a proposition of policy, but you definitely had to provide evidence. You definitely had to attend to your reasoning and make sure that you're making sound arguments and that your conclusions followed from your premises. So a lot of the things that we think of in developing arguments are things that are described in the development of a persuasive case. But I want you to, in this class, consider that these are two very different things. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons we teach them as different courses is because they are different things. So let's talk about what persuasion is first. And by the way, I have taught persuasion, so it's not as though I'm making this contrast because I think one's better than the other. I just think they're different. Persuasion, as it's studied in persuasion course, really has two essential characteristics. One, it has to do with how you're using communication to have something occur that you want to occur. Here it's expressed as the art of getting what you want. Persuasion is the study of compliance gaining strategies in communication. In other words, you want somebody to vote for you, you want somebody to stop smoking, you want somebody to marry you, you want to persuade somebody of an idea or a belief, or you want to get them to do something. You want to change their beliefs, change their attitudes, change their behaviors. Persuasion is about outcomes. It's about what you get by making an argument. The argument itself is different from the outcome. So you can argue all day long, make great arguments and not persuade. And you can persuade without making particularly good arguments. If you tried to persuade me to change your grade, right, and you offered me your best argument, I might say, okay, I'll change your grade. But what if I had already decided I was going to change your grade no matter what argument you made? You wouldn't know whether or not the argument you made resulted in the outcome that you desired. So there's definitely a difference between what you want to achieve and what you argue. Now, argument is designed to achieve persuasion. Persuasion is not argument, and argument is not persuasion. One is an outcome, one is a process of making claims and defending them. We love to think that they're necessarily connected, but that's a very hard thing to establish. Principle number 7. The conditions under which one argues are at least as important as the arguments one makes. Let's say you got a traffic ticket and you went into court and you made a compelling argument that you didn't deserve the traffic ticket. And after you were all done, the judge or the magistrate, whoever's hearing your case, said, well, that's all well and good, Mr. Smith or Miss Jones. I understand your argument, but the rule in this court is that the officer who gave you the ticket must be in the court to respond to any claims that you make, and that officer isn't here right now. So we're going to have to postpone the whole matter to another date so that he can be here and respond to the claims that you make. Well, that would be disappointing, but that's one of the rules of argument. So you can't win or even make your argument unless you're in the situation where the rules that they follow in making arguments take place. This can be very important things in things like parliamentary procedure and things of that nature, where somebody rules you out of order or makes it difficult for you to make an argument. All right, almost done with part 2, running out of time again, so I'm going to wrap up part 2, and I'll have a tiny part 3 to wrap up the